Carl E. Stewart. I'm a native of Shreveport, Louisiana, in the northern part of the state. I was born, reared, and schooled there. I was born in 1950. I am the second of three boys. I'm in the middle of three boys. My parents were Richard G. Stewart Sr. and Corrine E. Stewart. My dad is still alive. He's 88 and lives there in Shreveport. He's a retired letter carrier for the United States Postal Service. He's actually been retired now about 25 years, but he retired after 30 years of service. He was one of the first African-American letter carriers hired in the Shreveport area when he went on, and so he retired from that. My mother, in earlier years, did some part-time work, but mainly in her later years, she was a domestic worker. She died at an early age. She was 53 when she died. My maternal parents lived in Webster Parish, which is about 30 miles east of Caddo Parish, where I grew up, and my grandfather was a sharecropper. High school education is all, and my grandmother was a homemaker, and they lived on a farm in the rural area. Sharecropper owned their own property, family inherited property, but basically sort of got by on the lay of the land, selling pulpwood, various things like that. And my mother just had one sister. And my paternal grandparents lived there in Shreveport and Caddo Parish. My grandfather was a Pullman porter on the Kansas City Southern Railroad, and he traveled by train from Shreveport typically to Kansas City, deadheaded and came back. And my grandmother was a homemaker. My oldest brother is Richard G. Stewart Jr. There's just 18 months age difference between the two of us, so we grew up quite close in terms of our childhood, doing things together and so forth. And he was the first of our group to go off to college, and so he enrolled at Dillard University here in New Orleans, and I followed suit, as a matter of fact, of attending Dillard as he did. And so when he was a senior, I was a sophomore at Dillard, so we had that in common, having done a lot of common things. He later went to Loyola Law School here in New Orleans, where I went as well. My younger brother James is 5 years younger than I am, so he was, of course, the baby of the family. And so Richard Jr. and I grew up in the area, still a desegregated area, a segregated area in Shreveport, and so we attended one-race schools. School systems, public accommodations, etc., were not integrated at the time we completed school, whereas with James, 5 years younger, the school systems had become integrated, and so he didn't attend the same formal schools. He attended Broadmoor Junior High, which was a mixed-race school, and he graduated from Byrd High School, which is sort of the preeminent high school there in Shreveport. And so his growing up was somewhat different than ours in that it was more interracial, whereas Richard Jr. and ours was pretty much one race growing up. And so when James went to college, he didn't follow us to Dillard. He went to the University of New Orleans, here in New Orleans. But we all got our law degree from Loyola here in New Orleans. While we were in school, Judge Alvin Rubin was then serving on the United States District Court for the Middle District of Louisiana in Baton Rouge. And Judge Rubin had a stellar reputation as a brilliant jurist, a humanitarian, a scholar, and just a very able lawyer before that. And he was a writer and just very renowned. And so while we were in law school, we had the opportunity that Judge Rubin actually tried a case there while we were in school. And frankly, at the time, I thought it was a moot court case. I didn't really think it was a real case. I thought this was just kind of a showcase to give us as law students an idea of what it was really like. But indeed, it turned out it was a lawsuit, a sex discrimination case brought by a plaintiff against Bayou Candy Company. And so I'll never forget that as we were listening to the evidence and so forth, it was a bench trial, And again, we figured out this was for real, but just paying attention to Judge Rubin and how engaged he was with the witnesses and so forth throughout the trial was just amazing, because it was obvious he was very smart, he was on top of it, he was courteous to the witnesses, he was in control, and it was very different than what we'd seen on television of a judge who might be flippant or maybe not seemingly pay attention. But this was a real judge who was very engaged with what was going on, no partiality to either side, very even keel, but yet it was easy for us as law students to follow what happened. And I still thought that it probably was the case sometime before we graduated, we'd find out what happened in this case. And so at the end of the testimony, when Judge Rubin flipped his yellow pad and he began to recite testimony from the witnesses that had been heard, at the beginning of the trial some days prior, I just found it unbelievable that he was basically reading from his notes, not from a transcript of a court reporter, in such vivid details, but yet he was like telling a story and yet not giving away what the ending was going to be. And so it was just electrifying that a human being had that kind of mental acumen and sharpness to interweave the law and the facts as they delved down. And it was like listening to a story and you wanted to hear the end. Well, at the end of this dissertation, and only then did he then reveal the outcome of the case. And in one mind, it was like, did he write this before the trial and already had it scripted? But quite obviously he had not. But for me as a law student, and I'm sure others, we were just amazed at the capability of a judge to be the fair, impartial, person, to listen to the evidence, but to be decisive, because our sense is, well, it'll be years before anybody finds out. So the idea that a judge can really decide a case like that made an impression on me that lasted for a lifetime and mirrored a lot of habits I wanted to emulate later when I became a trial judge. And even to this day, I still find it remarkable, but a great, model. And so when he later became a judge on the Fifth Circuit and all that I've read, you can really see the brilliance that he brought to it. I graduated from Loyola in 1974. Unlike some of my classmates who had jobs in law firms and so forth, I had an obligation to give 3 years to the service. So when we took our oath as lawyers in October of 1974, a week later, I was off to Charlottesville, Virginia, for the Army JAG School, which was the introductory school for Army lawyers. So my legal career began as an Army lawyer. I served as a captain in the United States Army in the Judge Advocate General's Corps. So my first duty station was at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, in San Antonio, and I was a brand new lawyer, green as can be. But, the Army had a way of throwing you into the midst right away, so there was no time to be nervous. So I did both the criminal defense work, representing soldiers who were accused of crimes and so forth, but then because of the heavy retirement population in San Antonio, I had a lot of legal assistance work that I did, doing wills, power of attorney, general legal advice based on Texas law, not the Louisiana law that I had learned. So there was kind of a growing up experience. But it was good duty because there was no time to be nervous. You had a lot of things to learn quickly, but I had a lot of good assignments. When I came out of the Army, I went in private practice very briefly, but I think at that time it was clear to me that I had the public service bug. I really wasn't necessarily comfortable doing private practice. I liked doing public service work, which of course the Army was, and so when I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, that was a premium job because I wanted to do trial work. And in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Louisiana, I had an opportunity because we had a big docket. The Western District of Louisiana covered Shreveport, Monroe, Alexandria, Lake Charles, and Lafayette, a huge geographical area. And so I knew that the possibility of getting a chance to try cases would be pretty good. And so I started off in the civil area, but I only did that a year or so because really the trial practice was in the criminal arena. I enjoyed working in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it was one of the best jobs I had, but I reached the point of if I stay here longer, I might as well just declare that, I'm a career prosecutor, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a career prosecutor, so I decided to leave and try something else. And so I was trying to develop a private practice with, a partner there in Shreveport, build it from the ground up. I was 34 at the time, and so in the spring, there was an open seat. Caddo had never had but one African-American judge on the trial bench, Paul Lynch, and Judge Lynch was elected in '79, but unfortunately in 1982, he was attending a meeting here in New Orleans, a judges meeting, and had a heart attack in his hotel room. And so the one and only African-American judge in the history of the parish had died. And so there was kind of a groundswell of people from the white community, the black community, lawyers, for someone to run for a seat, to provide some diversity to the bench. And so though I had my sights on trying to develop a private practice, having incurred debt, buying equipment and all that, the last thing I was thinking about was kicking all that to the wind to run for a race that probably I didn't have very much chance of winning. The voting populace was still very polarized at the time. The electorate was still predominantly white, and so, the likelihood of running against one or more white candidates and winning was pretty slim. But nonetheless, I was persuaded by a broad cross-section of people, members of the bar, white lawyers, black lawyers, et cetera, to run. And so I cast my net in with the blessing of my law partner, because I really felt some angst bailing out on him when we'd taken these loans out to open a law office, and here I am going to run for a judgeship. But he gave me his blessing to do it, and so I'm like, okay, I'll go for it. But I was really afraid I'd run, lose, and then be in all this debt trying to start over again. So it was with some angst. But fortunately, it worked out. I ran against two opponents. There were members of the white community that really were encouraging me, many who encouraged me to run and so forth. And I was somewhat skeptical, knowing that I could not win with just a black vote. And people would say to me, well, I think there are more people out there that support you than you think. They're not going to put up signs and so forth, but when it comes time to vote, they will. Well, you kind of want to believe that, but you're not sure that's really the case. But as it turned out, I pulled in 50.9% of the vote, enough to avoid a runoff. And so an election in which I was 39 points behind, I won by a slim margin, but enough to win straight up. And so I won the election, and at 35 years of age, went on the First Judicial District Court as the second African-American to serve there. And so, I served a full 6-year term, and when I ran for re-election, I didn't draw any opposition, and it was a very enjoyable experience. I loved being a trial judge. When I left the trial bench, I went to the state appeals court, not because I was unhappy with trial work. One of the best jobs I've ever had was as a trial judge, but just an opportunity presented itself. But while there, I did receive a call from the then senior senator of Louisiana, Senator J. Bennett Johnston, letting me know that there were going to be 2 seats coming open on the Fifth Circuit, and asking me whether I would be interested. Well, of course I was, but again, I really thought this was a pretty long shot, because knowing things I did, that there'd probably be a pretty long list of people who also were interested, and it'd be difficult for me to muscle them out. But I did say yes to him and so forth, and so to my great amazement but joy, it turned out that he did indeed, he and Senator John Breaux nominated me for an open seat that had been created on the Fifth Circuit, and so I was nominated in 1993 and confirmed by the Senate in April of 1994, and took my oath in May in 1994. So at 44 years of age, I came on the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I think at one time there was the notion that the judiciary, state or federal, was made up of basically white men, probably 55 years or older, whereas now the bench, federal or state, are made up of a lot more younger judges in their 30s or 40s, females, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, people of all persuasions. And I think it just brings to bear there's so much talent, among the lawyer pool, that reflecting the various stratas of society doesn't weaken the bench. In fact, it strengthens the bench because particularly in an appellate setting where we work in 3-judge panels and work collegially with other, having the different points of view, frameworks of background, law school backgrounds, wealthy, not wealthy, big family, only child, all that kind of stuff. As we deal and grapple with so many problems, the perspectives are very helpful with judges trying to grapple with very complicated issues. And as we share and exchange ideas and perspectives, we learn from each other. And the same with our clerks who come from the same background. So I think the transformation from kind of a linear view that the bench ought to be made up of Ivy League people, white males, from one strata, is just antiquated and doesn't work. And I think today where judges educated in the South, educated in the West, maybe in another country, speaking multiple languages, et cetera, I think all that bodes well and bespeaks the quote of Chief Justice Rehnquist of how the bench is strengthened as the pool of candidates worthy and willing to give, public service, because as we all know, we work a lot harder than the pay we receive. So it really is more about the commitment of the person to excellence at the bench than it is pulling from one specific pool. I just would like to express my appreciation to the Louisiana Bar Foundation for what it has done over the long term towards promoting, the philanthropic end of our profession, providing opportunity for citizens, for lawyers, and promoting our profession in such a positive way, and certainly from a personal standpoint of the recognition given to me and my family on last year's Jurist of the Year, and the appreciation for participating in this project. Hopefully it's something that I have responded to in this archival may be meaningful to a younger lawyer or a younger judge, or some life experience might be something that's beneficial in the grand scheme of the profession. So I'm proud to have participated, and I appreciate you for taking the time to interview with me and share these memories.